volume can often be a proxy for productivity. And one of the things we know, especially now with AI, is that volume is the enemy. Nobody likes volume, people or AI. It's just expensive to go through. It takes a lot of time, either human time, compute time. And as a rule of thumb, the longer or more verbose something is, the less efficient it is at actually driving demand. How can we just take this idea or the hypothesis that we have when we're working with a client and boil it down? What's the minimum viable product here? And then the second way that I would answer it is, and how are we measuring that? How can we make sure that what we're putting out there can generate metrics and that we're thinking about those metrics in the right way? That one, I'll just go on a mini tangent on and say, a lot of times when we work on brand or top of funnel marketing, people want to add onto it these demand gen metrics or conversion metrics. I've seen this literally everywhere, every time. And one of the things that is important is to say, when you're building an MVP, especially when it's related to content, we need to be measuring the immediate next step.
Hi, welcome to Best Story Wins. I'm your host, Jason LANKOW, and I'm joined by my co-host, Josh RITCHIE. And today we have a special guest, our AI strategist extraordinaire, Julien Palliere from Column 5. Hey, Julien.
Hey, Jason.
Okay, so before we dive into, and I look forward to diving into some mechanics and technical details and so forth, but to get us started, can you share a bit of your background and how did you end up actually finding yourself in the role of AI strategist at Column 5?
Yeah, it was a windy road. So I think before C5, I was doing marketing in the music industry, and that had exposed me to different tech, and especially in the realm of distribution. So looking at blockchain, Web3, and AI, but specifically recommender systems at that time. And that, for me, was the fulcrum through which I joined C5 and was working a lot with you, Jason, on building out some of those capabilities, and with you, Josh, on the internal growth side. And then those two converged as we started working a lot more with our clients on AI. And here I am, an AI strat.
That's really cool. So what, with the work you're doing, kind of sitting at the intersection of tech, strategy, content, production as well, if you will. What drew you to this kind of work and what do you enjoy about it?
One of the things that I find coolest, irrespective of the client that we work with, is we're all figuring out how to create and distribute value. So we spend a lot of time thinking about that and how we can get people on the same page and feel like, okay, can we take a leap of faith or get into this agreement together and feel like this is going to be a valuable outcome for us together? And we're lucky to work with really talented brands and just awesome companies that do this on the daily. And when they're trying to acquire new business, we're trying to acquire new business, the question is, how can we communicate that to people? How do we get everyone on the same page and make this feel like a positive interaction the entire time? And we know that the more positive the interaction, the more value we actually end up creating, just all around, irrespective of the partnerships or the customers. And so locating content, which I think is a very big word in this setting here. Content is, how are we shaping these ideas and communicating them in a way where people feel comfortable and confident taking these leaps together?
And when you think about that role, we're working with our clients, what's the simplest way to describe what you actually do day to day?
Yeah. So day to day, we are working on hypotheses that we've created with those clients within their brand and corporate ecosystem, and figuring out what's working, what's not working. How do we leverage it? And me specifically with an eye on AI and what AI's role in leveraging that ecosystem can be.
So a lot of teams are right now either adopting AI tools into their workflows or creative workflows, or they're planning on doing so. And I think a lot of times it's at least being referred to secondhand as like, oh yeah, we're just receiving a mandate to figure out AI, and sometimes it's framed as like the C-suite or the board saying, just use AI, figure out how to do more with less, et cetera, et cetera. From a marketing brand building perspective, why is this approach, or what's flawed about this approach?
I think any mandate to get into AI is a good reason to get into AI. I think that these tools are evolving, and there's so much that we can get out of them that honestly, the most difficult part can be, well, what can we specifically get out of them in this situation? And so just doing that is a great exercise, but I think, focusing on the part of the question of, why isn't tech enough? Tech distributes ideas. And so it's really important to have good ideas and be able to really communicate the value that you're delivering. AI is just one, like I was saying before, one distribution mechanism of many. So if you've got the ideas, that's I think the more important piece of the battle here.
Yeah, and practically speaking, when you feel like, and I can think of examples where maybe there was a predisposition or just like hope that oh, we could get this thing done for cheaper by using AI, or where maybe that's like the solution looking for a problem in some contexts, right? But maybe where forcing it doesn't always fit, or it becomes maybe more of a hairy problem to try to solve with AI versus doing something manually. How do you go about kind of filtering through or identifying like where it's a good fit for a particular workflow or problem versus when it's just like feeling kind of forced?
Yeah. We always start with reviewing existing processes. AI is it's really good at some things. And then for other things, like you said, it can contribute to waste. And so working with existing teams and just figuring out what's the pipeline, whether it's marketing or sales or social, how do you get from the content calendar to the post? How do you get from the ICP to the sales enablement material? And who's doing what? I mean, we get everyone together in a workshop and figure out what are those steps. And then the blockers arise, and there always are. They always arise in that aspect that's really repetitive and takes a while to do. And that's where it's great to slot AI into, especially we want to focus on those existing processes, because it's just facilitates adoption. So if a team is working with a process that is enhanced by AI rather than a completely new process with tools and ways of working that they're unfamiliar with, I mean, we always do I don't think there's a case where we've done the second one.
So when you're looking at a given client, what do you, and you mentioned this a bit about the idea of scaling a story, or the importance of having good ideas that are worth scaling out. What do you look for? What are kind of the criteria you see in like a story or an idea that's worth really like building a system around and scaling?
I like this question because usually we struggle with choosing which of the stories we like to run with versus trying to find a story from scratch, right? I mean, a business is just a history of having created value and made hopefully meaningful relationships with folks. And so going to the clients or to the operating teams, to the sales teams, and just hearing about like, oh, what are the stories? What stories do you have for us? What's been working? What are some of your best relationships and why? And we collect those. And from there, the tough part can be, how do we distill the best from all of that?
So when it comes to that, unique perspective or proprietary data or that piece of gold that every company has, it's theirs and theirs alone. What role could that or should that play in creating a wedge for a brand, and how can having that wedge, or that thing that can play the wedge role, be a big opportunity for a company that's leveraging AI or is poised to leverage AI?
That story, or the distillation of all of the best things a company can do for its partners and its customers, that's the wedge. Articulating it in a way in which articulating it in a way that interests people, that trumps any sort of distribution mechanism or stunt. It's the thing that builds relationships.
Once we've identified the wedge, how do you design the system that makes it repeatable and scalable? Like, how do you actually architect and start thinking about how to structure that?
Yeah, so there's different roles that AI can help with, and with content, I like to think of it from this LLM standpoint, which is, okay, you've got your context ingestion, you've got the transformation, the output, and distribution. So depending on what we're doing, which stage, or maybe multiple stages, that's where we figure out, okay, what's going into the system, what's coming out, what do we want to come out from it? What are the steps leading up and after there? And then we find the tools, and sometimes we build the tools ourselves, but we find the tools that can fit into there. And it's pretty much, it gets very specific from there. So that's about as high level as I can generalize it.
Yeah, when it comes to building a system, for a client, like, how do you think about where these tools should fit in the system, and then also where it should not? Like, are there obvious places where, like in the creative workflow, for instance, trying to use AI is going to disrupt the effort?
We're always looking for places that are highly structured and repeatable. That's a pretty good recipe for success with an AI system. And if anything else is prone to failure. So if we're doing something that is really unique and requires a lot of customization at each step, there's always this cost benefit analysis between keeping the existing systems or bringing in AI. So especially when we're starting with a new client, or we're building something for the first time, starting with those scalable, repeatable, or I guess starting with those structured aspects leads to scalability and repeatability. We have tried, I think, in the past we've had a couple cases where we've tried to maybe overextend a process and just make it super modular to the point where if we change something here, something over there breaks. And that can also lead. So now we have a pretty good system for what exactly needs to be fixed at every level of every step of the way, for us to ensure like a really high level of consistency in the output and just in its success.
Yeah. So, like, as a starting point, so say we're bringing on a new client, do we have sort of like I don't want to say boilerplate, but do we have sort of a starting point for a creative workflow that we take and make adjustments to and tweak based on what it is we're doing exactly for that client? And does that save like work, on an iterative basis? Like, can we leverage some of the work that we've done for client A for client B, and then also for client C, and so on and so forth? Where are we typically, like, from the ground up?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. We are always iterating and building on these roadmaps and these systems. And clients are really happy, actually, when we are working with them. Then we're in maybe a month-long run or review period. And meanwhile, we've been doing a similar thing for another client. And midway through, I realized, this is really transferable. Let's go back here and add these ameliorations. We've had this a couple of times, and clients are always like, well, how did you learn that? Or where'd you get this from? And it's like, well, we're doing this a lot, and definitely learning along the way. Also, these tools, they update and they change. And so the better they get, and the better we get at wielding them, I mean, we're definitely constantly iterating. Thank goodness. Otherwise, we'd be in a constant state of just like learning from scratch.
Can you walk through an example you're particularly challenged by and excited to dive into, and just talk through what the workflow was and how AI was the lever for making that happen?
Yeah, here, let me brainstorm for a sec. So we've got a couple fun ones. We did one where we had an oh my gosh, what is that called? The newsfeed, RSS feed listener. And so I had built this system that ingests everything it can about the company. So basically through a site cache or the duplicate of a site, and then it builds out a bunch of different signals related to that company. So what are external signals that could impact, whether that's legislative or competitor signals, or signals from other members in the supply chain. So for example, tariffs was a big one not too long ago. And it then goes out and identifies online what news outlets have RSS feeds that are very niche and particular to those market signals. And what it does is on a daily basis, it loads up the RSS feed and looks for trends in basically in the news and how those trends could impact the company that we worked with. That was one of the key steps. Let me rephrase that one here. So basically, it listens, it gets all of the news, it compares all of the news to the different aspects of this company, and then it interprets with each new piece of news, how could this impact the company, the customers, partners, etc. And then it drafts content related to it, pretty short form. And then what we can do on the flip side is once we have all of these snippets, we can look for trends. What's happening in the market? What's happening in the industry? What's happening in the industry in China, for example, was for this client important. And then what ended up happening is that when I was presenting some of these trends and this content to the client, they thought there had been a leak, that they were working on something with a partner abroad, and they thought that there was a leak because some content appeared that they weren't sure was yet public. And so it was just a testament to how effective the workflow was, that it could even just pick up on these really, really subtle signals from RSS feeds and kind of keep everyone apprised as to what was happening in the industry.
In that scenario, where do you think the line is? And I know this doesn't matter from a client standpoint, but just from getting a little bit theoretical, I guess. Like, where's the line there between what's automation versus like AI is actually leveraging, or being leveraged to make something happen? Because I think there's a lot of people talking about AI workflows that are kind of just essentially automations, right?
Yeah, definitely. I am very close to some machine learning researchers, and their take is that AI just doesn't exist at all. And those two letters are just a way of marketing automations that just look really complicated. So maybe that's a bit of a cop-out answer for this. I think another way of saying this is that really especially when we're talking about content or brand, any workflow is taking context or information and transforming it into this way that people want to hear and that we know we want to position ourselves. And so it is a series of lots of different steps. And if we want to restrict AI to just LLMs, then I guess AI would just be the step that's actually embedding this information and then retrieving it in the generation phase. But otherwise, I think a daisy chain of different automations for me is still kind of in that realm of AI.
how do companies ensure that they don't risk sounding like everybody else, right? Like if everybody essentially has the same tech and everybody has the same creative workflows, not to say everyone's going to have exactly the same workflow, but if everyone's kind of trending in this direction of like having fewer people and leveraging these tools, like how do we as companies that are looking to stand out ensure that we don't um, just end up sounding like everybody else?
Easy. Tech doesn't make you sound generic. Bad marketing makes you sound generic. So essentially here, it's like we see this a lot in messaging, whether, sometimes it's with our clients, sometimes it's just out in the world. It's like, we're going to do this thing for you that's better and cheaper and faster. And like, that's what everyone says and what everyone has been saying, like, since the dawn of time when it comes to business. And having that wedge that we've been talking about, or that differentiation stance, is really about knowing what value you bring and how people respond to the way that you communicate it. Um, I'll say that with AI, that does get a little bit more complicated, because now as a lot of top of funnel turns to AI as a way of doing their discovery, or even, consideration and purchase, brands are becoming hidden or disintermediated by that or behind that AI layer. So similarly to the way when you browse on Amazon, you see the products and not the brands behind a lot of those products. AI is now starting to have the same effect, but across the board. So it's not now just for consumer products. It's for anything. And so, well, what does that do? Well, it means you have to have a pretty good AEO strategy to make sure that when AI is talking about your industry, you're part of the conversation. That's not necessarily just a brand thing. That's also understanding how these services work and how to best include them in your strategy, include them as an actor. But then it does mean that when building more long-term relationships with clients and customers, brand has to signal that unique and personal element. It's not enough just to have a funky logo and a kind of vapid, exciting tagline. If people don't connect to that, then, I mean, it might as well be disintermediated and hidden behind an AI. So anyway, just to summarize that up, it's like, know your AEO and know the value that you bring, and abstract both of those things into your brand.
Yeah, well said. I'm curious on the when we talk about, you know, differentiation and ultimately, building a distinct brand, what inputs do you think really make the biggest difference in arriving at that? I mean, you're touching on it with, connecting the dots between AEO and understanding what value you actually bring to people. But is it, through the brand strategy process, or, tapping in and really understanding your expertise, or telling a unique story with data? Like, what do you think is really like making the difference in building a, content system that actually leads to a distinct brand?
That one has a few different answers, because I do think people are looking for different things. At the top level, they're looking for something they can relate to, and that's where we go back yet again to this. What are the stories of existing customers, of your sales team, of your operating teams? What good stories come out of that, and how can you tell them? That's the top level. But I think, when making a purchase or deciding to go with the service, people are also looking to make sure you're credible. And so, do you exist online? Do you have case studies? Have their competitors worked with you in the past? It's funny, with AI, we definitely are looking at things like brand strategy, positioning strategies, copy guidelines in a different way. I'm looking at it now in a more algorithmic way. So if I were feeding this to an LLM, for example, and it strikes me how much of a company's brand guide or copy guide is super generic and basically unusable. I mean, every brand guide I see has a couple of things that we can't do anything with. We can't do anything with. We want to sound straightforward and exciting. Do you know, actually, the bot often interprets that as a lower literacy level. And so the content that it outputs is very information not dense. So it's very superficial, and the clients never like the outputs. And I think a lot of people struggle with that because at one hand, you're telling the bot to sound fully accessible, and then you're not happy when it doesn't sound like the way you know your customers speak. So I think what this has done is also made me realize how many brands guides and even their positioning is not aligned with the work that they're doing. Another fun anecdote or funny anecdote is the exclusion of the Oxford comma. AI does really poorly with excluding the Oxford comma because AI has a mandate towards clarity in its grammar execution, and the Oxford comma adds clarity. And everything that it's trained on, because it's mostly American content for English, has an Oxford comma. So even that, I mean, I've like I'm up to like dozens of hours now of in client billables of trying to remove the Oxford comma, and like nobody cares.
Yeah, the Oxford comma is a new M dash, right?
Yeah, if you can find it.
Right, like it's like the goal is to write like regular people do, which is uh, without as much clarity or correct grammar, right?
But it's like I can't even understand. I don't even know that we're on the same page about your positioning. Like, why are we talking about the Oxford comma?
Well, what do you think? What do you think is the reason that that becomes so important? Is it just wanting to make sure it is? I'm guessing it's because that's associated with or might be tagged or accurately interpreted as generative content, which yeah, obviously that's why people were trying to remove M dashes from their obviously generated posts. What's the what do you think is the goal in that like effort to like obscure? It's like everyone wants to use it but not seem to be using it.
I was just thinking that like everyone kind of wants the credit and like the street cred of like, oh yeah, we figured out how to seamlessly integrate AI into our creative workflow and achieve all these gains. Um, but they don't want they I think they're embarrassed if you were to call them out and say like, oh, that LinkedIn post you did the other day, like that was AI generated, right? Like, no, no, I crafted that myself. Like, it's a really weird dichotomy, huh?
Unfortunately, the answer might not be super inspired, but I noticed this problem more with larger organizational structures. And so when each person has a very specific role and you have like 25 of them on a call, and each person has their main lobbying point, and sometimes that might be the Oxford comma, sometimes that might be, I mean, um okay, let me give another example here. Sometimes it's the Oxford comma. Sometimes it's a specific way of talking about one of the product offerings. And so the larger the structure, generally, the more nitpicky it is with specific language. And you never really know what that language is going to be. It's unique to each organization. But with smaller companies, on the other hand, there is less of this. First of all, there's less people who are able to fuss over the details, but also um, the primary mandate is just to be productive, to literally produce and distribute content and marketing campaigns. And so there's less of an interest to making sure that it looks perfect. My personal bias, I mean, as someone who generally prefers working with smaller teams, is like, let's put it out there and see what we can do.
Yeah, on the note of producing, um, I think about this all the time, like you know, getting into a rhythm where like you're using these tools to create isn't itself the challenge. Like anyone can, use a crude version of a workflow using Anthropic or GPT to produce like a LinkedIn post or a blog post. But how do we ensure as creatives and as people that are, in operating in marketing functions and with the goal of driving demand and ultimately revenue? Like, how do we ensure that we're not just producing stuff for the sake of producing stuff, but that we're leveraging these tools to actually do what we're here to do and actually drive demand and increase revenue? Like, are there certain things you've identified that help brands like move away from that just busy work approach to actually getting results? What is it?
Yeah, I think what you're saying here is that volume can often be a proxy for productivity. And one of the things we know, especially now with AI, is that volume is the enemy. Nobody likes volume, people or AI. It's just expensive to go through. It takes a lot of time, either human time, compute time. And as a rule of thumb, the longer or more verbose something is, the less efficient it is at actually driving demand. And so one of the ways that I would answer this question is, how can we just take this idea or the hypothesis that we have when we're working with a client and boil it down? What's the minimum viable product here? And then the second way that I would answer it is, and how are we measuring that? How can we make sure that what we're putting out there can generate metrics, and that we're thinking about those metrics in a way, in the right way? That one, I'll just go on a mini tangent on and say, a lot of times when we work on brand or top of funnel marketing, people want to add onto it these demand gen metrics or conversion metrics. And I think I've seen this literally everywhere, every time. And one of the things that is important is to say, when you're building an MVP, especially when it's related to content, we need to be measuring the immediate next step, and not 10 steps down the line, which might not even happen for like 3 months after the content is available. So getting an MVP, short content that is better, and then making sure we're measuring it efficiently and correctly.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And you were touching on this a little bit earlier when you mentioned, laboring over like a grammar issue when maybe there's lack of clarity on positioning. I know some of these engagements are geared towards solving or at least on the surface can seem like they are about solving a technical challenge, but we always try to remember, like, there's an actual business goal behind that technical challenge to solve, right? Or that cool experience, interactive experience, or content system to build out. Because of the amount of technical considerations that ultimately do need to be addressed, that can draw a lot of airtime, right, in a conversation. When you are diving in, how do you balance that, like, desire to, like, here's something new we could do, or like, here are the technical things we need to address? Like, how do you balance that with really reinforcing the importance of understanding the unique point of view that we're trying to convey in the content, and actually getting to clarity on things like positioning and so forth, so that ultimately the inputs and kind of knowledge base that's piping into this system is actually sound. How do you kind of, because there's some tension there, right, of like, let's get this thing going and get it cranking out content, but if it's all slop, then you've gone nowhere fast, right?
I'm going to use this to, I'm going to hijack this question and talk about something that I think we're circling around, which is the idea of personalization. And I think personalization is a solution to this tension here, of like going fast, but also making sure we're talking straight, and saying the things that we need to be. And I think what AI allows us to, when we talk about the proliferation of content, we think immediately of like, oh, a bunch of AI slop. And what we see is that, well, actually, we can turn marketing now, even top of funnel marketing into ABM. We can have dynamic content on the homepage of a website and use people's CRM tags or Sixth Sense data or our B2B data, their LinkedIn cookie data, and start to retool our messaging to those specific personas based on all of the things that we know, right? I think one of the biggest difficulties, and that I'd mentioned earlier, is we have all of these very granular stories for how a business is creating value with its partners and its customers. How do we abstract that into this top line messaging? And then now the next step is, well, blowing that back up into all of this variegated messaging for all of those different persona groups. And so I think solving this tension of, not doing a bunch of slop from that middle stage, the top line messaging, can be just choosing a few of the most high value personas. What are the industry verticals that we are positioning ourselves to? Who are our priority ICPs? And then start from there, start personalizing from there, and then scale that personalization strategy across all of the other. There is a word that I am looking for, these segments. Thank you.
We talked a bit about, the POV and the story really mattering. Have you ever had challenges in helping people to understand and adopt that mindset? I think most marketers understand, but, ultimately at the end of the day, if the story doesn't resonate and the story isn't good, the tools that you use or the tools that you don't use, none of that matters, right? So, can you kind of speak to some of what you've had to work through, if there's some examples that come to mind? And you don't need to name any clients.
Totally. I think we can have this tension with marketing teams just as much as marketing teams can have this tension internally amongst themselves. And so I think of a few naming, brand renaming projects that we've done where it definitely exposed the different ways that folks within a company think about what it is the company does. And I think that is often where that bifurcation is where we can start having problems in building a unified story. It's also where the story can start to dilute if you're trying to please too many people, and having leadership step in and say, oh, this is what we're doing. Even if it doesn't feel like the most effective route, I mean, just having that clarity is important. And then the second part here, which is what if you don't feel like the story is up to snuff or reflects adequately what the company does? I think it's okay. I think there's still, especially within marketing teams, people are doing really unique and different things. And sometimes the top level brand story never even is, it's never part of a specific piece of micro content. And so I think as long as folks are focused on, how are we communicating value, they can get around kind of a faulty through line story. Or I guess that would be my advice, is to say, focus on the granular value in those messages and kind of ditch the top line. Was that what you were asking?
Yeah, I think that touches on it for sure. I'm curious too, just like when you are exposed to some of that bifurcation on the client side, with regards to like how the different folks talk about what it is the company does and how that should be talked about. Like, what is typically the divide, if you had to put your finger on it? Like, is it the marketing time is split in two? Is it marketing versus executive that doesn't see eye to eye? Like, how has that shown up for you?
It's definitely an industry cliche that product marketers and brand marketing teams are always somehow speaking different languages. And I think a messaging matrix is also a good way to overcome that, and just know that like there are different messages that should be evoked at different parts of a buying stage or around a different product, and knowing, how the organization is structured is really helpful for us to be able to make those recommendations. And sometimes, one of the best things about coming in as an external third party is that people are open to hearing fresh ideas or open to hearing perspectives like, actually this isn't for right now, or we consider this to be product specific messaging and not brand level messaging. And usually that gives folks a chance to mull over their stance um and yeah, honestly, just presenting it as a recommendation is often helpful to just overcome that.
You started talking a little bit earlier about AEO, and with all this talk about it, it's probably the most hot topic in marketing. It can be almost like a self-contained goal in some contexts. But what's the danger of treating that as the main focus and goal versus really just focusing on the goal of driving leads and growing revenue, which is, the underlying business goal for most tech businesses?
Yeah. Okay. So if we think about AEO as a new actor, it's interesting. It is mediating between our prospects and folks we're trying to turn into leads, but it is also its own separate thing from those leads. It's its own actor. And so there is a balance to strike between how we speak to or for the AI as part of an AEO strategy while maintaining the top line goal, which is to attract people and keep those people. I think the bigger issue right now with that is that we can't actually, it's not super transparent. We can't measure what's going on in there. And there's a lot of services that are claiming to. That's, specious and probably false. But how folks are using it, how LLMs are surfacing branded content, it's really evolving. And speaking to it now or prioritizing that goal over existing strategies, it's liable to like be completely upended multiple times. And then also, how do you measure it? Well, you can't.
I know we're close to time here, but sort of a last question. If you were to give one piece of advice to a VP of marketing who's overwhelmed by the AI hype, but also has a mandate to figure out how to use it for their company's brand marketing, what would that piece of advice be? Or maybe what would you tell them that they should be doing first?
That's a good question. I would say book a consultation with us. But in all honesty, I think what is something that is clogging up your team? What's something super repetitive that you're wasting a lot of resources on, or that you really just don't even have the time to get to, and explore a possibility for offloading that to AI, building a structure that you can just repeat around it. One of the things I notice every time with clients is we always try to start the engagement as simply as possible. It feels like there is a lot of it's like a very menacing ecosystem of tools. So folks are super apprehensive when they first subscribe to a new subscription, or sorry, subscribe to a new service and onboard onto a new tool. So we try to make those steps as small as possible. This would be part of my advice is like, don't bite off something huge at the beginning. Start really small, because what we notice is confidence is built super quickly. With just a little bit of familiarity, clients tend to go in like 8 different directions for what they want to add on and how they want the tool to evolve. And so that learning curve is super steep. It's like just getting onto the curve is the hardest part. So start with something that's like manageable and small, and then very quickly it'll open you up to having greater expectations and clearer vision for what it should and can do.
Well, that's great perspective. Thanks, Julien. Before we go, where can people find you online?
LinkedIn's a good place to connect. So you can connect with me at linkedin.com/IN and then Julien Palliere.
Thanks, Julien.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Julien.